Good morning. This is Nino Quiroz, and I am having a podcast with Joanna Mendel and Sarah Rose Graber, two of the collaborators that are creating Pullman Salons here in Pullman. Good morning, ladies.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Doing great. Yeah, happy to be here. Thank
Really
you.
good.
Aren't you freezing? This is such cold weather.
Oh, it is so cold. I'm from Miami originally, so this kind of weather is just biting.
It's not fun. It's not fun. Well, number one, I wanted to thank you for coming over and doing this little podcast with me. But number two, I wanted to thank you for last night, which I thought was fantastic. I went to the opening night for the Pullman Salons where you had it on my parents, and I thought it was fascinating. I had never been in immersive theater before, or I'd never been an audience member of immersive theater before. I'm on the executive board of Queens Theater in New York City, so I'm a bit I'm a bit of a theater person, not real big theater person, but I've never done immersive theater before. So I just thought it was fascinating, and I just wanted to thank you.
Well, thank you. We're so glad that you're here in Pullman to experience this live.
Yeah, it was really fun. One of the things that people were asking me is how you chose to do this. Can you describe a little bit about why you chose Pullman to be a part of this? And either one of you can chime in whenever you're ready.
I think I'll speak to that. As the artistic director of the Equus projects, I'd been looking for an opportunity to bring horses into a more urban environment. And in 2015, 2016, the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Park Service partnered to create a grant called Imagine Your Parks, where they invited artists to submit proposals for creation projects in the national parks. And I did some research on national parks, and a wonderful guy at the National Park Service in DC said, you should look into Pullman. And Sarah and I had actually worked together before. We did an amazing project in Sweden, and I had invited her to do this with me. And we came to Pullman, and we met with the National Park Pullman National Monument Park Ranger, Sue Bennett. She loved this project, and we actually applied for the grant. We didn't get this grant, but we did get other funding. And the National Park Service, Pullman National Monument, was so interested in what we were doing. They said, we'd like you to go into the schools and introduce the arts as a way of learning about Pullman National Monument, which is exactly what we did in 2016. And again, we sort of fell in love with the kids at Poe Classical and at Pullman Elementary. And our proposal to the National Endowment was to create a very large performance piece, immersive theater, for the Hotel Florence. And as of now, the Hotel Florence is still in flux.
It's still in flux.
Yes.
I know. That would have been amazing. That would have been amazing to have it at the Hotel
Well,
Florence.
it may still happen. But in the interim, Sarah and I, we held out for this vision for a long time and finally recalibrated last spring. We've been coming to Pullman on a regular basis, teaching in the schools. In June 2017, we brought horses to Pullman. So we've been performing and teaching here in the community. And we quickly recalibrated and said, let's do some theater events for intimate small spaces.
Now, Sarah, explain to me what Pullman Salons, the first one, was like. What was that? Sort of describe what that was.
Yeah, we wanted to start engaging the community in some of the stories that we had been collecting. We've been doing a series of interviews with people in the community here, in addition to what Joanna mentioned of the teaching and engaging with different groups that exist here, different clubs. And the first salon that we created was almost like a collage, a potpourri of different stories and moments from both the history of Pullman's past as well as kind of its current way of being, the stories that came out of some of these interviews. We again engaged our audiences in a very experiential event in which we had elements of food. We had moments where people were singing along with us. We had moments where we created connection with a web, all of which were connecting to the stories that we had to tell.
Because I feel like the Pullman #1 was less immersive than this one. Or I guess I should say that the Pullman 2 was more immersive than the first one. Is that a good way to sort of say it?
Definitely. Yeah, the first one was very much more a traditional theatrical and dance experience in which there was a defined audience space as well as a defined performance space.
The audience sat and watched the performance.
Mm-hmm.
In this version, Volume 2, we have staged it for the Musnart Art Center, which is a home in Pullman that wonderful artist J.B. Daniel runs as an artist residency. And we staged it for the 5 rooms on the first floor of this home in Pullman.
Yeah, I think that was the interesting thing is that it's so Pullman 1 and Pullman 2 I feel are almost drastically different because you had a different type of audience setup and a different type of like setup. So what were the sort of the challenges between both of the I mean what were the differences I guess between both of them?
Definitely. The one that we've just done, the immersive piece, has been a total joy to bring people in very close proximity with objects and materials and physically moving them through the space. We have a series of 6 different maps that are handed out to our audience so that they have a unique journey through the stories that make up the Quiroz family's history. And so each audience member is getting a slightly different experience through that journey. We were joking that it was like putting together Sudoku puzzles, trying to figure out if we send them to room here 1, room here 2, room here 3, what's left.
Being a part of it was odd because there was never a point to where I felt confused, and there was never a point to where I was like running into somebody else. So however you did it, it seemed to just flow well. I mean, there were other people there, but I never felt like, oh God, I can't stand here because there's people here.
Well, we wanted ideally to limit the experience to 2 people per space. So there's a bedroom, there is a closet, a pantry, which is 2 people in very close quarters, and they're listening in many cases to recordings of either your mom or your dad telling stories, which thanks to you, Nino, you came out on a separate visit here to Pullman to record your folks telling some of their iconic stories. And we have headphone splitters so that we had 2 sets of earbuds for those 2 people. However,
I think I have to tell you, I think that's what is a little bit confusing to people who've never done immersive theater and who have never done specifically this, that there is not an understanding that there needs to be a limited amount of people here in order to get the full experience. Would you say that's fair?
Definitely. I think in immersive theater, part of what makes it such a unique platform for telling stories is that it requires audiences to be active participants in the theatrical experience. So when an audience attends an immersive show, they are part of making the show happen. And that requires not only the desire to listen, but the desire to be curious and to take ownership of their journey through the show. There are instructions for how to engage with some of the rooms, but we want people opening boxes and looking through drawers and trying on articles of clothing and taking pictures with the Polaroid camera and writing things on the wall and adding to a timeline and literally putting their own fingerprint onto the world that we've created. Immersive theater creates a space, but then it is the participants that are an essential part of making it come to life, along with the performers.
One of the interesting things I thought is that as a performer, you really have to be, as you said, engaging with people. What is that like? Is that different for you, Joanna, to being in immersive theater because you actually are in contact with the audience members as opposed to being on a stage and having them sit down?
Well, you're speaking to somebody who directs a company that performs occasionally with horses. So we need to be working with real-time, immediate decision-making when we perform with these animals. And in a way, it's not that different from having to be conscious, aware, and generous enough to engage with a live audience that's actually your partner inside the performance. So to me, there are enormous similarities. And I do want to add that when you work with these amazing equines, it calls for a lot of generosity and tremendous amount of multisensory listening. You're listening through your hands, through your ears. You're taking in a lot of information visually about the animal. And we are really inviting audiences to engage all their senses inside this performance, which is sort of an extension of the kind of what I like to call physical listening that we do when we're working with the animals. You know, in this day and age, a lot of people are sort of tied to their devices, and the breadth of their physical listening and taking the time it takes to really listen has really been diminished. So this is an invitation for people to listen generously and immerse themselves in details.
Now, we first met Joanna about a year ago when we first were brought this idea about doing this, and we've sort of been working on it on off since then, but mostly in the last few months. But I feel like with you, Sarah, that because you just came from Scotland, that you sort of were just immersed in this immersive theater. But what is your sort of, when you're planning a piece like this, or when you're planning a performance like this, when you are coming and the majority of the planning work that you're doing is in just a few days, what is that like? What is sort of when you're planning to do something like this, what do you, what's sort of how do you attack something like that?
I do want to say that Sarah and I do regular Skype or FaceTime planning. Sarah is an integral part of this, even though I'm on the ground because she lives in Great Britain.
That's the one good thing about technology, is that you can
That's right.
bring her in.
So
you were not that far away.
No, she wasn't. She's really an integral part, even though she didn't have the pleasure of meeting your folks for that initial interview. We've done 50 interviews of Pullman residents. We're so lucky to meet your folks. She's an integral part of the planning all along the way.
That's the interesting part to me, and that's why I posed that question to you, is that I'm wondering if there's a part of your brain that you have to use that's a little bit more, because I don't think I'd be able to do that. But what was it like for you to have to be involved in this so far away and then coming and sort of being immersed in it then? I mean, does it take something different, or how do you attack something like that?
It's a fantastic way to work, I think, as an artist. Joanna and I have been working together since 2014, so we have a common vocabulary in how we build work together. And we've worked in different environments, in different countries, with different animals, in addition to people, which has really colored our palette for how we create our process. So being in Pullman since 2015 and having regular visits where we've engaged with different people really starts to get our creative process moving just from each one of those seeds that's planted. And it lets our minds create different ways of thinking about how we can tell this story best. So we have many, many conversations that lead up to the preparation of a performance, so that by the time we do get into the space, we are ready to hit the ground running. And with that time frame in place, it really flexes our muscles as professional artists to make confident choices and to know how to make something happen. So instead of taking the time to always sort of put something in place and then sort of look at it and decide if we don't like it and then try it again and put something in place and see if we don't like it. We rely on that ahead of time to front load that process, to think through how we want to do things. So when we're in the space, we're getting it right. We're doing what needs to happen and building. And we were joking as well about our 13-hour, 14-hour days, but there's something so exciting and thrilling about immersing yourself in a creative process where you can just do the work.
Yeah.
I think as artists,
That's
we
a
can
perfect
get
way to put it,
pulled
yeah.
in different directions. And I suppose that's life as well in general. We're always getting pulled in different directions. So it's a gift when you can get into your bubble and just put your head down and go.
Now, how did you hear about my parents? How did that sort of happen? Because it's funny, because being somebody that's in PR, a lot of people are like, "Oh, we know that you're the one that did this," and I'm like, "No, it's I mean, I'm helping them with the content, but this is really their performance and this is their doing." People are so used to me promoting my parents, which I do and I enjoy doing it. But it was nice to have somebody actually interested coming to us without me having to beg people to use them in any of their things. But do you remember how sort of that came apart?
It's actually very interesting. I'm trying to remember. We've really created a very complex web of connections here in Pullman. As Sarah said, we've been here since 2015. We've done 50 interviews with different residents, and we've attended Pullman Civic Organization meetings. And so there are a number of people who have become our on-the-ground collaborators. And I actually don't remember who recommended. We've been adopted by an amazing family here in Pullman, Jane and Bob Butchwaller.
They're fantastic.
And they know
so
your folks.
special.
And it's very possible that Jane recommended. But we've also interviewed Annie Lira. And I know that your mom and Annie were friends as kids here in Pullman. And it's possible that Annie recommended that we interview you. I actually don't remember.
When you were I had already asked Sarah this, but what sort of about them were like, okay, this could work? Was it the fact that they had the physical materials? Was it the story? Was it what was it about them that said, okay, the number 2 is going to be them?
Very, very candidly for myself, I'm an adoptive parent. My child is mixed race. I'm very aware of the complexity of race in Chicago. We have friends in North and South Pullman at this point, and I was really interested in the multinational complexion of your parents' life. That was tremendously interesting to me. And your mom tells really lovely stories about falling in love with your dad and the slight resistance that she got and her she's just very adamant. No, this is it. I'm sorry, but I'm in love with this man. And the same for your dad. And I
think
he dated around though a little bit.
But there's something so complex, isn't there, about when you fall in love?
That's right.
And the rest of society isn't accustomed to a love that is structured in the way that your parents was. An interracial marriage was
I think especially
brave thing.
In 1964 when they got married, it certainly was not something that was done. And I remember asking my mom, were there ever any issues with that? Because I, as somebody who's mixed race, have never, especially here in the neighborhood, have felt that pull. In New York and sort of the larger city I have, but certainly not here in the community. I'm sort of accepted as the way I am. That's just me. I can't remember where I was going with this question.
It was different in the past.
So I was talking about my parents.
Change.
Yeah. So I asked them, I said, was there any issue with this? And my mom had said that my grandfather came up to her when they were first dating, and he said, okay, now you got to stop this.
Yeah, she actually told us that story.
And she didn't know how to respond to that, but then she didn't. They kept going, obviously. And then nothing ever was said, and my dad was completely accepted. And I thought that would be where there would be issue on the white side, that they didn't want the Mexican son-in-law there. But then I remember, I'm like, you know what, I'm going to go ask my dad. And I straddled him alone. I said, listen, was there any issue with you marrying a white woman? And he said, yes, there was.
He told us that too.
That they did not want that because there's an idea that you want a good Mexican woman who's going to be there and going to be home when you get home. And my mom was not a good Mexican woman who was going to be home when he got home. My mom was working. She had her own career and her own ideas and was certainly not subservient to my father in any way.
But that's irregardless of her race.
That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely. But I think that especially in the older generation, there was this idea of like, he's got to settle down with a nice Mexican girl and then they're going to have kids and then they're going to do this. And that was not the case. So it was kind of odd that there was a little bit of a hesitation on the family side, but then they sort of got together. And that brings me to my next question for you is that in terms of this performance, was there any worry that So when I went there, I knew what you were going to say. Not no, I knew the stories that were there, and I knew I would enjoy it because you were going to be telling my parents' story. But I was a little bit worried that other people that did not know us would be like, "All right, why do we care about this? What's the big issue?" Was there
That's
any
a great question,
concern?
though.
Was there any concern that people were going to say, "All right, but why? Why are you telling me about these two people? I don't care."
In theater, we use the specific as a way to tap into the universal. And your parents' story is so beautiful, and there's so many layers to it that watching their journey unfold in an immersive way opens up all these doors for people from many different backgrounds to connect and layer in their own stories. And that became a really powerful motive for us in this story being the vehicle for how we tapped into larger themes about connection, about where we call home, about what family means to us, about work, about integrity, and about taking the time to pay attention to details. So, in many ways, your family's story becomes a really gorgeous vehicle for holding the everyman's story, the every woman's story. And so I wouldn't use the word fearful of it. I think I was really excited about
Mm,
seeing the potential in that.
yeah.
I think we both believe that theater should challenge, not only be entertainment. Obviously, we are challenging the audience to be active participants, but we're also asking them to think and feel, to touch, and I don't think either of us are that interested in creating theater where the audience passively sits and just goes, "Oh, that's nice."
Yeah, you could go to any theater and get that. Why,
Right.
that's sort of what is out there.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for sitting with me and discussing this, and thank you again for all the hard work that you both have done over
Thank
the
you.
past several months to pull this together. You were fantastic. You both were uh, just a wonder to watch and wonder to stay in character. And I was just I felt like for me as an audience member, I was worried that it was going to be difficult for you as the performer because you knew who I was and that I was that I was sort of on the inside. But you never made me feel that way. You always made me feel like I was a real audience member and that I was going there and enjoying it like anybody else was. You stayed in character and it was just wonderful. So I just want to thank you again for everything that you did.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Such a privilege.